Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Why No One Plays. This is a series where I talk about champions in League of Legends that currently see very little play in both the competitive scene and solo queue, especially over the span of the past few years. And so for today we're going to be talking about Poppy. I don't have really anything corny to say this time, but I do want to talk a little bit about Poppy pre-rework and post-rework. She has sort of a similar problem to Yorick actually, in that they were both very obscure champions way back in the day, and despite their reworks being pretty good for their design, neither champion has really been able to thrust themselves into the spotlight. And so we're going to be comparing a little bit about Poppy pre-rework versus Poppy post-rework. Before we get into the video though, if this is your first time watching one of my Why No One Plays videos, then welcome. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to watch, and if you're someone who enjoys playing Poppy or mains her, I want to give you a full disclaimer that this video is not a champion hate video, and while I will be critical of the design and gameplay shortcomings, the intent is more just to bring a little discussion as to why these champions might not be picked as frequently from a design standpoint. Some of the champions I talk about may actually be quite powerful if played correctly. In fact, at the time I'm recording this video, Poppy along with 4 other tanks are sitting in the top 5 highest win rates in top lane right now, so I guess tank meta is back. But regardless, how strong a champion is doesn't always translate to how popular they are. So if you find this video enjoyable, then please be sure to leave a like, comment down below, and share this with your friends. After you're done watching this episode, check out my other League videos if you're interested, and if you want to support the channel, consider donating through PayPal or Patreon. It would be very much appreciated, but for now, let's get started. Poppy is an unusual case for a tank. When you think of a tank, the first thing to come to mind would typically be someone with a lot of health and defense. Their main goal is to protect your team's DPS by absorbing as much punishment as possible, allowing for the DPS to attack without fear of being killed, or they would just be focused on locking down specific targets. Of course, Poppy has no shortage of resilience, being arguably one of the most difficult tanks to take down in the entire game because of her high base stats and her disruptive nature, along with being one of the few tanks in the game with a small hurt box. But she can also deal a significant amount of damage if given the opportunity to, having close to if not just as much as a bruiser. Funnily enough though, her classification is that of a Warden. If you remember in my Cho'Gath and Tahm Kench videos, I talked about the 2 subclasses of tanks in League of Legends, Vanguards and Wardens. Just for a quick recap, Vanguards, true to their name, are the first ones in a fight and generally have very explosive engages like Malphite, Sion, Zac, and Alistar. They usually carry some form of built-in survivability like sustain or shields to allow them to soak up as much damage as possible, while being able to lock down key targets for as long as possible to take them out of the fight right away. On the other hand, we have Wardens, the defensive tanks. That's not to say they can't have the same kind of effect as Vanguards, but their main priority is focused on protection and disruption rather than engage. Poppy just so happens to be a Warden, but just like Cho'Gath, she doesn't really play like one. See, Wardens have abilities designed to support their teammates in battle. Braum has his W and E to beef someone up while blocking enemy fire, Shen can nullify basic attacks and provide a shield to anyone, Tahm Kench can swallow allies to get them out of sticky situations, Galio has his ultimate, which is sort of similar in property to Shen, and Taric is basically a support who happens to build tank. But Poppy, on the other hand, possesses very little to help her teammates aside from her W, and even that doesn't really classify as a tool designed to protect. It's more a lockdown source than anything else. If anyone remembers Poppy back in Season 5 or earlier before her rework, she had a completely different niche. Before, she was this really clunky but insanely annoying hybrid hyperscaling bruiser who had one job and one job only, to take down an enemy squishy. In that sense, she was more of a diver. One might say that her role changed after her rework, but I disagree. In fact, I still think she has the very same job after all these years, just in a less monotonous and straightforward way. Her goal remains the same, to lock down a particular target, but Riot simply reworked her kit to be less focused on one target and one target only, at least that was their intent. See, the main problem with her back then is that all of her abilities were practically single target. Her Q was an empowered basic attack similar to Garen and Wukong's Q, her W gave her a bunch of attack damage, armor, and move speed, her E was sort of the same back then as it is now, and finally her ultimate was what Mordekaiser's ultimate is, just that it doesn't send her and the target champion to the Shadow Realm. She was the most broken stat checker in the game at the time, almost like a Jax, but even worse. Extremely weak and exploitable early game, but practically unstoppable in the late game, effectively preventing one person on the enemy team from being allowed to play the game because she was a tank who could do just as much damage as a 6-item AD carry and was completely immune to any source of crowd control and damage that did not come from the person she was attacking. The downside to this is that she didn't have much of a purpose after that, and as a result no one wanted to really play her because her kit and playstyle was just too degenerate and constrained. So Riot aimed to fix that by removing her single target focused kit and pushed her to be more dynamic with a little bit better area coverage. For starters, her passive changed from having any damage that does more than a tenth of her health to occasionally empowering her next basic attack to throw her buckler instead, and she could pick it up to gain a pretty big shield. So basically they've made her passive more conditional because you now have to track when your passive will be up before going for a trade or all-in, and not only that, but you have to make sure you can pick it up before any enemy champion can destroy it. As for her Q Hammer Shock, instead of being an empowered basic attack, it's now an AoE skill shot that attacks in front of her and slows enemies. It does massively increase damage relative to her old Q Devastating Blow, but if and only if the target is struck by both instances of damage. The payoff is definitely there, 240 base plus 180% bonus AD and 16% max HP damage that you can spam every 2 to 4 seconds. The only caveat is that it covers a very small area and it's surprisingly difficult to land the second hit, but she does have tools to ensure that it can. Instead of providing bonus attack damage, Steadfast Presence now gives magic resist along with the armor buff carrying over, and the bonuses are permanent and doubles when she drops under 40% health. The movement speed buff is still present, only a lot shorter, and she also gains an aura that knocks up any enemy who dashes into or inside it and grounds them for 2 seconds, so they can't continue dashing. Obviously you can use this to ensure the second hit of your Q will land, especially if the enemy has a dash and you can time it right before they use it. Heroic Charge is mostly the same, only instead of magic damage, it's physical and the stun duration is longer in exchange for more cooldown. Slamming an enemy champion into a wall can be used to land the second hit of her Q, probably a bit easier than her W anyway. Lastly, her ultimate has completely changed. Now she charges up her giant hammer that sends a skill shot in a target direction. It knocks enemies back towards their fountain, but if you cast it early, it's just a knockup for half damage. Chances are you've noticed by now that all 5 of Poppy's abilities, her passive, Q, W, E, and ultimate, are conditional. Each ability has some criteria that needs to be met in order to reach their maximum effect. Her passive adds some bonus damage to her auto attack, but to get the shield afterwards you have to either nail a last hit or pick the shield up. Her Q can do crazy damage, but the target has to be stuck in the impacted ground for the aftershock to hit as well. Her W can be a major disruption for so many champions, but you have to time it to catch out their dash. Her E is a very long stun, but you have to slam them into terrain. Her ultimate, well actually her ultimate's not really so much conditional because there's 2 defined purposes for it, but you kinda get the idea. It's clear Riot made some attempt to add skill expression to Poppy's gameplay, but here's where problem number 1 comes into play. While it's important for a champion to not have a kit full of one-note abilities, having every single ability be conditional leads to massive inconsistency, especially if each ability has a condition that does not respond to the others. She has separate conditions for each ability, making it difficult by default to maximize the utility of each one. Her passive shield requires her to hit a target, which means if you're going after an enemy champion, you have to either decide whether you want the bonus magic damage or an immediate shield, because unlike Draven's spinning axes, Poppy cannot control where the shield will land. Her W only works if there's someone on the enemy team with a dash, or I guess Blast Cone can work too. But it makes it practically useless against almost half of all champions aside from the movement speed bonus, and even then, the aura effect lasts only 2 seconds. Enemy champions can simply just walk out of it. Lastly, Heroic Charge requires her to slam into terrain. Since she can't create any on-demand like Ornn can, its effectiveness is negated anywhere in the middle of the lane or in the river unless the enemy team isn't paying enough attention to their positioning. And not only does her passive W and E have conditions that are beyond her control, but none of them make it any easier for her to meet the condition of another ability. The only synergy she has between conditions is that any of her other activatable skills allows her to land the second hit of her Q, and only if she meets that original ability's condition first. When designing a champion, with 2-parters to every ability, you have to make it possible to start a chain effect. Ornn's basic abilities and ultimate are all 2-parters as well. The Q's second part is the piece of rock that spawns, the W's second part is brittle, the E's second part is the knockup, and his ultimate's second part is when he slams the elemental back. But if he successfully lands any of these abilities, it automatically ensures he can land at least one other attack afterwards, and this naturally applies to other tanks as well. Shen's taunt makes it easy to land the empowered effect of his Q, and Q's slow allows him to land his dash. Leona's Zenith Blade allows her to proc Shield of Daybreak's stun, which then guarantees she can land Solar Flare. Alternatively, starting with Solar Flare lets her guarantee landing Zenith Blade. Even Cho'Gath, who I made a video on, has more consistency in stringing his abilities. He can either slow and or silence the target first with E or W to land his Q, or if he can land his Q first, he can follow up with an easy silence or walk up to them for his E, stuff like that. That's what allows these tanks to be so consistent. One part allows them to land another no matter which one they start with, and not only that, it doesn't require any circumstances to be met, they just have to land that first ability. Poppy on the other hand has to face a second layer of challenge beyond the first, and getting through the first is hard enough as it is. Problem number 2 is that she has very strict timing windows and awfully poor range. Tanks do have a tendency to get kited, especially by very mobile champions, but Poppy arguably has it the worst. Her Q's area of effect is small, only 430 units of range, which puts her far outside the standard attack range of mages and marksmen, which is 550 to 600. Now she can close the gap with heroic charge, but that only also has 475 range. For comparison, tanks who also have mobility skills have much higher ranges. Sejuani's Q is 650, Shen's is up to 600, Alistar's Headbutt is 650, Orange Searing Charge is 650, Leona's Zenith Blade is 900. Maokai is the only other tank with a dash less than 600, being 525, which isn't that much better than Poppy's, but close enough to allow him to reach ranged targets, whom tanks are supposed to lock down. Poppy is the only tank in the game with a dash range under 500, at least to my knowledge, meaning if the enemy ranged carry is mindful of their spacing and kites properly, they can permanently stay out of her range and there's almost nothing she can do about it. Now I know that her W gives her a speed boost great enough to get close, and it's enough to usually do so, but it also means you sacrifice a very important follow-up tool to keep them locked down. After all, the aura lasts only 2 seconds. If you exhaust Steadfast Presence to get closer, they now have free usage of whatever mobility skill they have. And unlike Cho'Gath, Poppy doesn't synergize too well with runes like Glacial Augment or Approach Velocity, and she doesn't do too well building Turbo Chem Tank either, at least not entirely. If each of her abilities conditions are met, she can do extraordinary damage, far beyond that of most other tanks. But landing all of her attacks is difficult, if not straight up impossible, against some matchups and enemy team compositions. So not only is she extremely inconsistent, but in certain games, she can straight up be countered in Champ Select, an issue other tanks in the top lane don't really have, like Maokai, Ornn, Malphite, and Shen. Now I don't want to discredit the matchups that she does win. Poppy can single-handedly destroy certain melee carries in top lane, such as Riven, Camille, Fiora, Wukong, and Irelia, who heavily rely on their dashes to be effective. But even then, her timing windows are not that generous. The third problem is more of a nitpick than anything, but still worth acknowledging. Poppy is meant to be a carry tank. Carry tanks are champions that have all the properties of a tank, but usually come with much higher base damage in exchange for either less sustain or utilities such as Malphite, Shen, Sion, and Poppy. These champions are not as durable and disruptive like Ornn and Maokai, but they make up for it by being actually able to go toe-to-toe with even bruisers and fighters like Renekton, Jax, Aatrox, and so forth. Ordinarily, these champions have very simple to execute combos, consistent trade windows, and some form of easy or high amounts of damage. Shen has a ton of % health damage on his Q, Sion's Q covers a huge area and does big damage, Malphite has his Q, which is arguably the most annoying ability in the game, I might add, things like that. Poppy does have the damage, and her combos are somewhat simple, but she does not have consistent trade windows, and more importantly, her damage is not that easy to land. Even though all but one of her abilities are area of effect, they're not actually good at hitting a lot of targets. In fact, most of the time she can usually only pin down one enemy champion, so despite her rework trying to put more emphasis on causing widespread disruption as she rushes into a fight, she still faces difficulty when it comes to targeting, making her easily exploitable if you play the numbers game, such as a 1v2 or a 2v3. Combining all these factors together, this makes her an unconventional tank and not for the better. Again, there are times when she can certainly perform when needed, but because of how conditional and circumstantial she is, players would much rather have someone like Maokai, Malphite, Ornn, or Shen if they need a tank. Much more reliable, perhaps a little easier as well, even if they don't do nearly as much damage. Alright, I think that's about everything I wanted to talk about regarding Poppy. I think she's definitely fallen from grace back in the glory days of Season 6 when she was actually a Tier 0 tank. But then Riot nerfed her to be much less forgiving if she whiffs her attacks and lowered her consistency, which is the #1 reason I think players don't pick up a champion in either pro play or solo queue. I know I'm practically being a dead record at this point, but consistency is really the driving issue behind almost every champion in Why No One Plays. That doesn't mean those champions aren't good or viable, it's just that players generally don't want to put in the extra effort to make them work when there is a slightly worse option but a lot easier to execute on. They're just much more specific in what they do, so you'll need to have a pocket pick, especially in Poppy's case, because as every top main knows, whoever is first pick in top lane is already at a disadvantage. So for all the Poppy mains out there, what do you think? Do you think I exaggerated her shortcomings or did I hit the nail right on the head? I know she can definitely be a lot of fun if she's against the right enemy team because Poppy is just so annoying to deal with, especially one who knows her windows of opportunity well. Then again, this isn't a video specifically directed towards Poppy mains because they know her weaknesses better than I do. This video is meant for the general public who doesn't know much about these champions to begin with. What do you think should be done to fix her if given the chance to? Let me know in the comment section below whether you're a Poppy expert or just brand new to her. Thanks to everyone who made it all the way to the end of the video, hope it was an enjoyable watch. Once again, please don't take this as a champion hate video, it's purely meant to be discussion based. Hopefully Riot can do something about it one day, but if you'd like to support my channel, best way you can do so is like the video, comment down below, share this with your friends, and subscribe for future uploads. Also check out my Discord server if you'd like to talk more about League content. Lastly, if you want to, consider donating to my channel either through PayPal or Patreon, it would mean a lot to me. Patrons get to vote and even request future videos, so if you have a particular champion you'd like me to talk about, then maybe check that out. Links are all down below, but for now, that's going to be it for today. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon for the next video. Take care.